Politics, commentary, entertainment, sports, news and opinion now. Here is Steve Malzberg.
If you are President Barack Obama and you want to be a transformational president, getting that transformational stage sometimes require you to get a third term. Ronald Reagan, the reason we talk about Ronald Reagan so much, he ended up getting 3 terms with George H.W. Bush being able to win after the 8 years of Reagan's presidency. And people in the White House and President Obama, I'm sure, would love to have a 3rd or 4th term. And I think that's in some reasons why so many people in the Obama orbit are very happy about a potential Hillary candidacy, because it does perhaps provide the best opportunity for a 3rd Obama term.
All right, a 3rd Obama term. Joining us now is Noah Rothman, writer and editor at Mediaite.com. Mediaite.com. I don't want to swallow it. Hey, Noah.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Good to talk to you. All right. Now what gets me here, that was on MSNBC. What gets me, and this ties into your story that's up right now on Mediaite about the percentage of journalists who identify as Republican. We'll get to that in a second. But I mean, if Hillary gets in, she might very well become a clone of Obama. But for crying out loud, after yesterday's poll from USA Today and I think it was Pew, 65% of people now say that they want the next president to have policies different than Obama. So how does Hillary run as Obama? She might govern as Obama, but she has to run away from Obama if she runs.
Yeah, she certainly won't. I have no idea what Mark Murray was thinking, let alone talking about in that situation. The NBC's senior politics editor, that makes absolutely no sense. As you referenced, that poll suggests that by a 2-to-1 margin, voters in today, let alone 2016, are looking forward to a candidate who will govern in a different fashion from the president. You have last night Senator Elizabeth Warren mounting a broadside, an unveiled shot across the Obama administration's bow, saying that they took his advisors taking the side of Wall Street over average Americans, implying that there was some callous disregard for American health and well-being. And Major Garrett had posed this exact same question to the president not 3 weeks ago, April 17th, when he said, listen, whether Biden or Hillary runs, they're going to be running as an extension of the Obama presidency. And the president, aware of how politically damaging that could be,
right,
said, no, of course they won't. I'm not going to jam them up, was the quote that he said. Everybody's aware of the fact that isn't going to be the case, and it's certainly not going to get any better over the course of the next couple of months. So what Mark Murray was talking about, I have no idea.
Yeah, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Now your piece that, and he's probably one of the 93%. The 93%ers, that's what we should start calling the media, I guess. And 7%. In the latest survey, 7% of journalists in this country identify themselves as Republicans.
Down from 18% in 2002. And there's a slight decrease in the amount of journalists who identify as being Democrats. I think it was in the mid-30s, high 30s in 2002. Now it's down to around the mid-high 20s. And Chris D'Eliza at the Washington Post, who flags this report, has some important caveats. He says this isn't a poll of political reporters per se. This is a poll of all journalists from all professions. And the real spike occurred in people who identify as independents, and a really teeny spike in people who identify as other, socialist, libertarian, whatever. So he says, you can't really say that this is anything about the left-wing media, and maybe it tracks sort of a little bit with the amount of voters who identify as independents. So overall, it'd probably be great if all voters all journalists identified as independents, even if you are a political reporter or not. But it is certainly something that conservatives are going to run with, because they've known for some time that reporting, particularly political reporting, slants to the left, and this is just a confirmation of that.
Absolutely, and that's why I think it's so incumbent upon whoever is the Republican nominee. They really need to learn. I mean, they really need to adopt a maybe a softer, gentler, or a little tiny bit softer, gentler Newt Gingrich approach. And when a question is stupid, when a question is nonsensical, or when it's baiting, or when it's has no basis in fact, they need to call the reporter out, whether it's at a debate or anywhere else, and say enough. and maybe even know a little bit about the reporters. And I know some people would say, oh, you don't want him to be combative, you don't want him to make the reporter feel bad, but you just can't sit and take the media bias anymore because it's a killer.
Well, you'll certainly see a lot of that in the Republican primaries in 2016. You referenced Newt Gingrich, who hit a series of questions out of the park that were otherwise damaging and rather pointed,
right,
and by turning it around on the questioner. And I think that's a tactic that worked very well for him, and you'll see a lot of people emulate. But you referenced the caveats there. In a general election, you don't want to turn off the squishy middle by being combative. And I think that's the rule of thumb that will be applied to general election debates. You won't see a whole lot of attacking of the questioner from a prospective Republican nominee.
All right, let's talk about today. The administration came out with a dire climate change report and have promised that the president will act any way he can. Forget the Congress. He's going to do whatever he can on his own, and oh boy, he will. They're predicting floods and fires and all this kind of thing. And if you thought it was phony in the past, boy, are you out of it, and boy, are you wrong. Couple of things here. It's interesting also that I haven't read the whole report, but they do use the term, according to CBS and TV in D.C., they use the phrase climate disruption as another way to say global warming. So they talk about climate change, but they don't want to mention global warming anymore, so they call it climate disruption. It's ever changing, that. Ever since they can't justify why the temperature hasn't gone up and why we had one of the most brutal winters on record. But that aside, every report I've heard, and granted I've listened to CBS radio and CNN most of the day, this is like the gospel now, because the White House said it. It's a blistering report, and it's now the president has to act, and that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, and it's not that dissimilar from the 2009 quadrennial environmental review that came out, save for one fact that this report focuses a lot on the economic impact of climate change on the United States, a little bit more so than the 2009 report. And I think that there was less, I wrote about this, I think there was less agitation from the White House about the climate change report in 2009, obviously because it wasn't an election year, but also because it was on the heels of the Copenhagen summit,
right,
where the president went to Europe and failed dismally to secure anything other than a transfer of wealth from wealthy countries to poorer countries to combat climate change. Everything else was a failure, and the Kyoto Treaty died there. And this time around, we focused on economic impact in order to sort of channel the American anxiety surrounding the economy and jobs, and also to energize the Democratic base. But if you were to challenge any of the proposed ways of dealing with this problem, you can see that it's a problem, and then you say, all right, well, then John Podesta comes out and says, next month, we're going to put some new regulations on coal-fired plants and decrease the amount of emissions in the United States. But all that coal is being sent, dirty coal is being sent to Europe. It's quadrupled exports to Europe over the past few years.
Right.
And 23% of coal exports increased in 2007 to Asia. All that coal is being burnt. It's just not being burnt here. And if you were also to examine, for example, the 2014 IPCC report, the United Nations Climate Panel report, which also notes that, sure, the United States is no longer the key emitter. China is, and they've grown dramatically. But the West is still at fault. Why? Because of American and Western demand for products and for industrial supplies like steel, is forcing these countries to make stuff.
They're gonna, I know they're gonna slant it, and it's just really abhorrent to.
It's always going to be a demand issue. It's always going to be Western economies that are forcing this issue, because the aim is to decrease Western ability to create and produce.
Yep. No, I couldn't agree with you more. All right, I want you to hear Don Lemon during their coverage of the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Mark Lamont Hill and Don Lemon. Lemon's wearing a bow tie, and here's what happens. All right, we don't have it. Anyway, Lemon said you look like a Nation of Islam. I'm sorry, Lemon was told he looks like a Nation of Islam, and he says, I love them. He then says that he buys the Last Call or whatever the newspaper is, and this issue has a great story on torture in U.S. prisons, and then Montiel says, I didn't know you. Boy, you're blacker than I thought, and then they fist bump. I mean, I've never seen anything like it, to be honest with you, on CNN.
That's just silly. Yeah, Portland Lemon gets really beat up from fellow African Americans. Why? I don't know, because he's slightly fairer than they are when it comes to issues of race. I don't know. It's frankly a bullying impulse. I don't understand where it comes from, but I can see where it's effective, and it certainly is a double standard because it wouldn't apply to somebody who is Jewish or somebody who is Asian. It would be seen as offensive.
Right, and the Nation of Islam is classified as a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center.
Right, exactly.
And he says he loves them. He says he loves them. It's insane.
Shocking.
It's insane. All right, Noah, great talking to you, sir. As always, read Noah and the rest of the fine people at Mediaite.com. We'll speak to you soon, Noah.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Noah Rothman, ladies and gentlemen. You know what's next. Oh, you know what's next. It's the Malzberg Gimme 5. I almost said the panel. I would have been wrong. Gimme 5 is next on the Steve Malzberg Show. Don't go away.